News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on a farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Keep it on the floor, bring up the fire, and light it up, take it up higher. Gonna push it to the limit, give it more. You really want more? Scream it out louder. Keep it on the floor, bring up the fire, and light it up.
I am the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Every week, we uphold values that will never, never die. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Well, this week, it is the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, who has made waves. He said what I think is just an obvious statement, and yet it has created a media firestorm. He said, initially it was at a private dinner, that he does not believe that this President Barack Hussein Obama, loves America. And he's been on TV defending the obvious. Roll it, Brittany.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to apologize for your comment?
Not at all. I want to repeat it. The reality is, from all that I can see of this president, all that I've heard of him, he apologizes for America. He criticizes America. He talks about the Crusades and how the Christians were barbarians, leaves out the second half of the sentence, that the Muslims were barbarians also. He sees Christians slaughtered and doesn't stand up and hold a press conference, although he holds a press conference for the situation in Ferguson. He sees Jews being killed for anti-Semitic reasons, doesn't stand up and hold a press conference. This is an American president I've never seen before.
But to say that he doesn't love America, I mean, that he could view foreign policy as a Democrat might view it, and through a different lens than you, a Republican, might see it. You can understand the differences between you, but to condemn his patriotism, to question his love of America?
I'm not condemning his patriotism. Patriots can criticize. They're allowed to criticize. I don't hear from him what I heard from Harry Truman, what I heard from Bill Clinton, what I heard from Jimmy Carter, which is these wonderful words about what a great country we are, what an exceptional country we are. When he called us an exceptional country, he said we're an exceptional country, but so is Greece.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that Giuliani is forced himself a little bit into a box, because when he says the president doesn't love this country, he should have also said the next logical thing, which is he's not a patriot either. I would say that those two things are the truth, that he doesn't love this country and he's not a patriot. I point to the release of 5 Taliban commanders from Gitmo, which I said at the time, if you're willing to do something like that, you have no regard for our national security, and therefore you're not a patriot. To support Bo Bergdahl, who is clearly a deserter and who deserves to be court-martialed, you're not a patriot. There are lots of examples here of how I believe this president has behaved in an unpatriotic manner. And I think Giuliani should have just stuck to his guns all the way. He doesn't love the country, and he's not a patriot. And that doesn't mean that anybody that criticizes this country doesn't love it. Of course you can criticize the country and still love it and still be a patriot. But with this president, there are too many speeches in which he sees America as the problem and the rest of the world as having legitimate grievances. With this president, there are too many actions which run contrary to America's interest. So it's not like a couple of Democrats who on occasion will criticize American foreign policy, or even Republicans who on occasion will criticize some aspect of the United States. With this man, it is a pattern of conduct. It is a pattern of speeches. And you put it all together, and Rudy Giuliani had the courage to say what is patently obvious. He does not love this country. And, I want to break it down for the audience, for all you folks out there, point by point. I mean, if you think about what this country stands for, this has always been a capitalistic country based on the free market. Does the president love capitalism? No, he doesn't. He doesn't like the free market. He wants to transform the free market. He wants to turn the economy into something much more like a European economy, where the social welfare net is much larger. That's contrary to the tradition that has made this country great. Does he celebrate the fact that we are one of the most meritocratic nations on earth, where in this country you can start from any position in your life and rise to any office? Does he often champion that? Very, very rarely. In fact, he keeps telling us that the game is rigged, that there are certain built-in factors that mean that some people are naturally going to be oppressed or discriminated against. He doesn't see this as the greatest meritocratic society in the history of the world, which it clearly is, for all races, for all religions, for everybody. That's what most presidents celebrate. In fact, the only time he ever says anything positive about this country is only when he, on occasion, references his own rise. And he talks about, only in the United States could a black man like me ultimately become president of the United States. But he says that few and far between. Generally, he doesn't present this country as one of the greatest meritocracies in the history of the world. What about our Constitution? Is this a man that celebrates and reveres our Constitution? No. In fact, he's destroying the Constitution. Through unlawful executive action, he tramples on the rights of Congress. And he does it knowing full well what he is doing, because he said, when it came to amnesty for illegals, that he didn't have the authority to do what he later on went and did. And so he has no respect for our Constitution. Does he have any respect for the system of checks and balances? This is a hallmark of the American tradition, that each branch of government is limited and is checked by the other branch. No, he has no respect for that. His administration has no respect for that. How many times, when Congress has conducted an investigation, an oversight investigation, his administration has tried to stonewall the investigation instead of allowing due process to run its course? There's no regard for the American Constitution, the greatest constitution in the history of the world. He wants to destroy it. He, like so many liberals, see it as fundamentally, deeply flawed, a quote-unquote living, breathing instrument that has to be destroyed to suit whatever is trendy at the current time. So he has no love for the Constitution. Does he respect the rule of law? And I've got to say, this is what the great American tradition. This is supposed to be a law-abiding nation, and we're proud of that. In some nations, there are many, many laws, and nobody follows the laws. And yet here in the United States, we've always been very proud that our laws are generally sound and good, and the people are law-abiding. And this is a long-standing Anglo-American tradition. We celebrate the rule of law. Does he celebrate the rule of law? No. If it doesn't suit his vision of what this country should be, he's willing to trample on the rule of law. What about when it comes to national security? Really, since the end of the First World War, America became a leading world power, ultimately a superpower. Most presidents have said with great clarity and conviction that America's role in the world is a benevolent one. that American power in the world generally acts in a humanitarian way to bring greater freedom and justice around the world. Does he see American power that way? No. He sees American power as a grievance in the world, as something that has to be withdrawn. Basically, he legitimizes what foreigners are saying, evil foreigners that want American power withdrawn. He gives them legitimacy and says, you know what? They have a valid viewpoint. We should honor and respect that viewpoint, and we should withdraw American power. So he has no love for America's role in the world, not its traditional role for most of the 20th century. He wants to change that. And he wants to allow other powers to take hold of various spheres of influence, which means what? Which means diminishing American power. So no, in foreign affairs, this is not a man that understands how American military power has to be wielded. Nor is this a man who says without shame and without compromise that when America acts in the world, we do good. No, he's ashamed of America on the world stage. He wants the United States to just be another country unexceptional, not exceptional. And then we've got to ask ourselves, what about the Christian heritage that so many presidents will often reference as a heritage that has brought great light to this country and that is a beacon of light for the whole world? In fact, what about this idea that America is a city upon a hill? Does our president ever talk to us in that way? Believing in our goodness as a people, believing in our goodness in our historical traditions? No. He said very famously that he sees this country in many ways as the forces of darkness within this country, the folks who cling to their guns and their religion. Well, you know, the First Amendment and Christianity, these are hallmarks of American identity. For him to be so condescending when he speaks about that doesn't show that he has any pride in what this country truly is. That shows that he has no pride in the very foundations of this nation. And what about when it comes to American culture? Is he one that truly celebrates American culture? When it comes to our social wars, he wants something like abortion on demand, for example. He is constantly, as well as his entire party, and in this regard I blame the entire party, they're constantly trying to drum up a gender war. That there are these evil men trying to oppress women, instead of understanding that for the most part, men in this country want women to succeed and they're not oppressive, regardless of what you think on the issue of choice. But no, he and his party constantly talking about this so-called war on women, when this country is not defined by that. It never has been. In fact, the way that American men treat women is in many cases exemplary and always has been. Amongst the most egalitarian nation in the world in that regard. And then when it comes to classes, does he see us as one nation indivisible? No. He constantly talks about class warfare. His language is always that of the rich taking more for themselves and oppressing the rest of the country. That's not the language of America. I did a whole monologue on that once. This man does not love the country. And you know what? He told us so. You've got to think about it. When he was first running for office, he said clearly that he was going to transform this country. Well, A politician that is running for an elected office, at that moment, he is courting the people. He was courting us. That's the courtship stage. You know what he's telling us at the courtship stage? I don't like you the way you are. I'm dating you because ultimately when I marry you, I want to change you. Now, in my personal life, for whatever reason, I tend to be one of those people that I'm always counseling other folks on relationships. And one of the first things I say is, in the courting stage, if he's saying he wants to change anything about you, or if you are saying you want to change anything about that person, that is wrong. You walk away. Because ultimately you don't love that person as that person is. Well, he told us straight to our face, I don't love you the way you are. I want to change you. His entire election platform was based on that. And as I said at the very beginning, not only does he not love this country, he is also not a patriot. And the only thing I fault Giuliani for is for not being totally logically consistent in what he said. Giuliani, when you're speaking the truth, go all the way.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Once greedy, always greedy. The Clintons are back in the news for, guess what? Being unbelievably greedy. There's a piece written by Ron Fournier, and this is no conservative by any means. It's posted in the National Journal, and it's called A Stupid and Sleazy Clinton Decision. What is so stupid and so sleazy? It is that the Clinton Foundation, which is a charitable organization, is taking money from foreign governments and all kinds of foreign governments, even those who are sponsors of terrorism. Now, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, her husband was involved with the foundation, and they basically decided to stop taking money from foreign governments. However, after she left office, very quietly, they began once again to rake in the dough from just about anybody that's willing to give it to them. And doing this means that Hillary Clinton, who is now at the top of the polls to be the Democratic nominee, she has put herself in an impossible conflict of interest. And that's why Ron Fournier is crying out, this is stupid and sleazy. You even have people like Juan Williams on Fox News beside himself. How could the Clintons be doing this? They already have a really bad reputation. When Bill Clinton was in office, they were selling the Lincoln bedroom out to donors. They already have a reputation of being able and willing to do anything for cash. And the public remembers the Clinton years as years of scandal and corruption. So why should she want to begin her campaign for the presidency with this stain upon her? Listen to Ron Fournier explaining how upset he is.
Questioning whether or not this is a good charitable foundation doing some really good things around the world. It is. The problem here is, first of all, politically it's stupid because they're taking money from countries that go against what is going to be Hillary Clinton's brand and her reputation as somebody fighting for women. Some of these countries are not very good for women. And it's sleazy because of the perception. Even if you give them the benefit of the doubt, obviously, there's no way that you should have someone who's thinking of running for president taking money from foreign countries because it raises the level of, what is it they're getting, they're expecting for that money. Even the Obama administration said this was not right, which is why they were not allowed to take these donations when she was Secretary of State.
Well, you know what? For the Clintons, it's all about the perks and the privileges. In fact, the Wall Street Journal did a really detailed review. They're the ones who broke the story. They're the ones who discovered that the ban on foreign donations had been lifted. And they also showed that these governments are funding the Clinton travels to the tune of like $8 million so the Clintons can travel. And it's very obvious that this is a lobbying organization of some kind. When a foreign government provides money, this is a backhanded way of getting access and buying influence. And that's why this behavior is so alarming. Now, Ron Fournier raises a really interesting point. There's another problem here. It's not just that the public will be outraged that a foreign government will have influence upon Hillary Clinton, especially should she become the commander-in-chief, but also so many of these countries fund terrorism. So how can you present yourself as a credible opponent of terrorism if you're willing to take money from countries that are funding terrorism? You have no credibility whatsoever. And let me use that word that Democrats hate that we use. That's unpatriotic. We talked earlier about Obama being unpatriotic. I would say this is unpatriotic. And Republicans shouldn't hesitate to call her out on it. Furthermore, she presents herself, especially this time around, the second time around. You remember when she ran her campaign in 2008, the gender issue was not one that she played upon very much. She didn't really want to go there. She only invoked the gender issue when she lost to Barack Obama, and then she delivered a speech in which she said that millions of votes combined in support of her had cracked holes in the glass ceiling. So she only invoked gender at the very, very end. Well, many sources close to the Clintons now are saying that perhaps going forward, they're going to play the gender card much, much more aggressively than they did before. Well, there's a problem with that. You want to tout yourself as a woman, a champion of female rights, but at the same time, you're taking money from governments that are notorious for oppressing women. That's also a huge contradiction that the Republicans should exploit. And finally, there's another really important point. In a poll that was conducted, 50% of Americans believe that Hillary Clinton represents the future, and no other potential candidate ranked higher than her on this whole perception of who represents the future and who represents the past. By her doing this, this drudges up all of the sleazy past. And it's going to be clear to the public there isn't much daylight between her and him, Bill Clinton, Mr. Sleaze par excellence. They're two peas in a pod. And not just when it comes to her enabling his predatory behavior on women, but also the two of them combined in trying to suck up as much money as they can from whatever source they can, regardless of the consequences. You know, they say that the big vice of the Democratic Party is sex. The big vice of the Republican Party is money. It seems that the Clintons combined both vices, sex and money. That's a pretty lethal combination. And this really reinforces how shaky the Clinton campaign is. There's another really good piece out there by John Podhoretz, and it's basically titled, "Hillary's Boring. Worse for her, the 2016 Republicans aren't." And he goes on to say how she's primarily famous for being famous. Indeed, she's one of the best known people on this planet and has been for nearly a quarter of a century, but for no legislative achievements. And mostly, her famous words tend to be famous gaffes. So this Hillary candidacy is riddled with problems. And lots of the latest reports reveal that amongst the Democratic base, they are hungering for somebody else to step up to the plate. I'd love to see that. Why doesn't somebody challenge her? She's such a weak candidate. She can be knocked off. If Barack Obama did that in 2008, what's everybody so afraid of? And not just Elizabeth Warren, but some other Democratic governors. Even a Democratic governor that has a record that he can present as less radical than that of Barack Obama has a better chance of being well perceived by the public than Hillary does, because she's got two sets of baggage. One is her husband's baggage, which, because she behaves the same way he does, becomes her baggage. And another one is all of the baggage of Barack Obama. She was his Secretary of State, and she supported a foreign policy that turned out to be a disaster. To Democrats out there, challenge her. You deserve a better leader for your party. And we as a country would love to have a debate between a Democrat that is not corrupt and a Republican candidate. Now, this week, there's been so much talk about this summit that the president has been leading over the nature of quote-unquote violent extremism. It's not Islamic radicalism, it's violent extremism. That is one of the stupidest phrases I have ever heard. First of all, it's an oxymoron. To be violent is to be extreme. So what is violent extremism? It doesn't make any sense. All of this to avoid using the phrase Islamic radicalism. And many people are saying, this president really is an apologist for the Muslim world. But you know what is really at stake here? In many cases, he wants to cover up his inaction, his failure to lead. I thought the best comment of the week came from the former U.S. ambassador to Syria, who explained that it was American inaction in 2012 and 2013 that led to the rise of ISIS. Listen to this.
Yes, we could see the extremism rising in Syria in 2012 and 2013, and it's reached the point, Andre, I was just in Turkey 2 weeks ago and met with some people from the Syrian opposition there, and they told me a story that I think is quite indicative of the problem in Syria. One of the goaltenders of a major Syrian soccer team joined the uprising in Syria in 2011. It was peaceful then. As fighting took off, when the Syrian government began to shoot and kill people, and protesters responded to defend themselves, this scorekeeper, his goalkeeper, then joined and became a commander among the fighting men. And for 2 years in the city of Homs, they were surrounded by the Syrian government. They were starved to death, women starved to death, men starved to death. Finally, the United Nations, after 2 years of this siege by the Syrian government, negotiated a ceasefire, and the people were able to leave. That goalie from the soccer team has joined the Islamic State. Now, the Islamic State just killed children in Iraq for playing soccer. So why would he join the Islamic State? It makes no sense. One of the people I talked to just talked to that Syrian goalie just a couple of weeks ago. And the goalie said the world watched for 2 years while we were bombed, while we were starved, and nobody lifted a finger. And so nobody has any business now giving us lessons in civics and democracy. And that kind of repression has added to the extremism problem that we have in the Middle East.
Well, this ambassador was saying what so many within the administration had said, and they leaked it to the press. We were telling him that he had to be much more proactive in foreign affairs. In combination with the withdrawal of American troops precipitously in Iraq and the failure to be proactive in Syria, we now have this ISIS catastrophe. And the president can try to use words all he wants, all day long, all week long, to mask it. But the truth is, he failed. And ISIS is his creation. This is Dr. Grace speaking the truth.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Well, you can always count on the president to say the wrong thing. The thing that upsets this country very much. The thing that makes it seem as though the rest of the world has grievances that are legitimate and that somehow we're in the wrong. We're not exceptional. I didn't have time to address this before, but the president made comments during a speech at the National Prayer Breakfast in early February, which were really upsetting. And I want to play that clip for you. Listen.
Humanity's been grappling with these questions throughout human history. And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. In our home country, slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ.
Well, those comments have rightly been widely condemned. And here to discuss this with me today is the person that I call a Renaissance man, a good buddy of mine. He is a pastor. He is the host of Freedom Fridays with Carl Gallups on WEBY in Florida. He's also a best-selling author of books like The Rabbi Who Found Messiah and most recently Final Warning, Understanding the Trumpet Days of Revelation. You can find those books and learn more about him at carlgallups.com. But today we want to hear from him. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Well, thank you, Dr. Grace. It's always a joy to be with you.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you on my show. I'm with Carl every Friday at 6 o'clock, so I do a commentary on his show, and it's always a great treat for me when I'm the one that gets to interview you. All right, Carl.
Well, no, I enjoy dialogue with you and back and forth, and you're a brilliant woman and a dear friend, and it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, the pleasure's mine. So, Carl, tell me how you reacted when you heard these comments, especially someone like you who is steeped in biblical history, who understands Christianity very well. How did you react when you heard him say this?
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to be as fair and balanced and honest about all of this as possible, as you and I always try to be. First of all, over half of the American public, in every poll taken since then, has deemed his comments to be at least inappropriate. And when I first heard them, that was the first thing that hit my heart and soul was, wow. I mean, regardless of some of the granules of truth that he dropped, what an inappropriate time, what an inappropriate place, what an inappropriate way to speak to those issues, adding fuel to the Islamic fire. So inappropriate, absolutely, and not entirely accurate, of course. Now, I want to be clear. Listen, atrocities committed in the name of religion and even, yes, Christianity have occurred throughout history, yes. But the fundamental difference, and he has got to know this, the fundamental difference is that New Testament Christianity does not call for the beheading of people because they will not become Christians. It does not call for death and destruction and terror. New Testament Christianity, the teachings, the life, the ministry, the death, the resurrection, the gospel of Jesus Christ does not call for the enslavement of people who disagree with you. It does not call for world domination through murder of women and children. However, Islam does. The Quran does. The teachings of Muhammad do and have since the 600s A.D. For 1,400 years, this has been the modus operandi of Islam. So when and what is more inappropriate about all of this is that, as it has been pointed out quite profusely, he yet refuses to call it Islamic terrorism. And when Islamic terrorism is wreaking its havoc, its death, its destruction, burning people alive in cages, men and women and children, cutting off heads, just putting hundreds of thousands of Christians to flight throughout Iraq, and causing 30 to 50,000 little children to be orphaned because their parents were killed in front of their eyes. Parents watching their children's heads cut off and put on stakes, their wives and daughters raped before their eyes, and Obama and his administration refuse to use the word Christians concerning the victims. They're victims of extreme terrorism or some such nonsense. So his comments at the prayer breakfast, what an inappropriate place and time to even go there, to point his finger at America and lecture us once again and say, lest we get on our high horse? What does that mean? Who's on a high horse? When these atrocities have been committed in the name of Christ, by and large, the Christian world has dealt with it. We've condemned it. We've defeated it. We've gone to wars over it. We've killed each other to stop it. He mentioned that the Civil War and slavery in America. Well, excuse me, 600,000 Americans lost their lives in that to end that. And the apologies and the reparations that have been made since then are ongoing and probably will be until the return of Christ. And so, but there's no apologies for Islamic terrorism. There are no reparations. There's no wide-scale condemning of it by Islamic leaders. So there's the difference, Dr. Grace.
He's trying to tell us, you see, don't think that our civilization is superior. That's what he means. Like, let's get off our high horse. We're not any better. We're not any better than them. That's really what he's saying. And it's a shocking statement because Christianity overall, its influence around the world has been to bring light in the darkness.
Yes.
Predominantly so. I mean, there's going to be evil in the world and people will commit evil acts and call it whatever they want. But the overall legacy of Christians acting in the world has been one of tremendous good that they have brought. And for him not to say that, not to acknowledge that, but to actually try to equate Christianity with ISIS, it's absolutely, I think it's a barbaric statement.
Yeah, well, it was, and completely. The facts he dropped in a few facts, but the facts he dropped in were in the context of a distorted framework, and so what he did was to completely violate the context of history, as you have just said, and to declare somehow that lest we Americans, is what he was meaning, as you just so brilliantly stated, get on our high horse as though we think somehow we're morally superior. Well, here's the problem, Dr. Grace, as you and I have talked before. America has its problems. We have our ills and our evils. We have our own filth and sin, like every other nation of the world. You and I come from a biblical worldview. We know the problem. We know that sin infects every heart and soul of every man, woman, and child on this planet. We have a sin problem. And so this rules and reigns until one's heart is right with God through Jesus Christ. We understand this. But the historical fact is that the experiment called America, started more than 200 years ago, has been something the world has never seen. We are one of the few nations in the world where people are beating our borders down by the millions, even willing to come here illegally, even willing to risk death and jail and prison and anything else to get here with their families, to escape the evils of the world around, the darkness of the world around. They come here because there is a chance of freedom. There is a chance of prosperity. There is a chance of a future and hope. There is a chance of education and health care and all of these wonderful things that America does offer. And on top of that, it's a historical fact that America has represented itself to be the most benevolent nation in the world, in the history of the world.
Yes.
By and large, when disaster strikes around the world, who does the world call first? Who does the world look to first? I can't imagine the shape that this world would be in if America as we know it, which was grounded and founded upon the Judeo-Christian biblical concept of government and living, I can't imagine the darkness this world might be plunged into if America disappeared. So,
well, Carl,
to equate us with ISIS is just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, and also, even if you talk about the second part of his statement about slavery and Jim Crow, and some of these deeds were committed in the name of Christ. Well, look, overwhelmingly, it was Christians who fought hard for slavery to be abolished around the world. Slavery was a fact of life around the world, and it was the Christian evangelicals in Britain who started a crusade saying this is contrary to biblical teaching, and we've got to bring an end to it. Without Christianity, he would still be enslaved.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and those are the historical facts, because Christians, real Christians, were outraged that Christianity in the name of Christ was being used to prop up this evil. And so real Christians spoke against it, fought against it, laid down their lives for it. Well, people who say, yeah, but real Islam, we're against ISIS. Well, then stand up, step up, speak out, scream out, lay your life down if necessary to defeat it. But I don't see that happening. And the truth of the matter is, listen, not all Muslims are of this terrorism ilk, but and like any other religion, if you will, I do a lot of traveling, as you do, and I speak to a lot of Muslims. I do, and I question them about all of this. And what I discover is a lot of people who call themselves Muslims, especially in America, they're like any other religion. Well, I'm a Muslim because I was born into a family of Muslims, or I'm a Muslim but I don't go to mosque, or I'm a Muslim but because I'm not a Christian, or I'm not a Hindu, or I'm not a Buddhist. And so I understand a lot of those Muslims are here in America just looking for the freedom and the prosperity, and they just want to live as peaceful Americans. I understand that. I get that. They're welcome here as far as I'm concerned. But the Muslim that attends mosque faithfully, reads the Quran faithfully, listens to the imams faithfully, by and large, they are listening to the teachings of Muhammad and the writings of the Quran, which call for the very things that ISIS is doing.
Well, when you think about it, the Christian faith tells us that when we are confronted with our enemies, we have to pray for our enemies. We also have to turn the other cheek. The Muslim faith teaches that you've got to spread the faith by the sword. Yeah. So I think that is a very stark difference between the two faiths. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm standing on my high horse. Christianity is a much better faith.
Well, not only that, but I'm also standing on my high horse of a constitutional republic called America. We have a lot of house cleaning to do. I know that, and you and I are trying to preserve our constitutional republic. But as long as this republic keeps its eyes on God, if we will do that, and as long as we who come from a biblical worldview will stand in our relationship with Jesus Christ, we can continue to take hope and prosperity in the gospel of Christ around the world, which is not at the point of a sword. But this is our calling to speak against these evils and these atrocities. And again, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of this interview. At the very least, highly inappropriate. Dr. Charles Krauthammer called it pathological. That's interesting. Pathological refers to, pathology, of course, you know this, your listeners know, refers to either physical or mental infirmities or disease. And yet, this is Dr. Krauthammer, who is a psychologist, referred to the commander-in-chief, the man in the White House, as pathological, as having made these comments. And so, over and over again, he raises his finger in the air. he sets out to lecture Americans as though we're complete idiots, and most of the time he does. He winds up making pathological statements, inappropriate statements, or disingenuous statements, or downright deceptive statements.
Very well said, yes. Very well said. Thank you very much for being with us. You have been listening to the best-selling author of The Rabbi Who Found Messiah and Final Warning, Understanding the Trumpet Days of Revelation. That was Carl Gallups. You can read all about him at carlgallups.com. Thanks for being with us. And this is Dr. Gray, upholding values that will never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Shut up, just shut up, shut up, 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 just shut up, shut up, shut up, just shut up, shut up, shut up, just shut up, shut up, shut it up, just shut up, shut up.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace, the host of American Heartland. And it's time for us to find a candidate in the country that deserves the designation of being the one, the only, that deserves to be told to just shut up. This week, it's a no-brainer. Because you have a spokesperson for the State Department, Marie Harf, who made an idiotic comment. Listen to this.
Well, I think there's a few stages here. Right now, what we're doing is trying to take their leaders and their fighters off the battlefield in Iraq and in Syria. That's really where they flourish.
Are we killing enough of them?
We're killing a lot of them, and we're going to keep killing more of them. So are the Egyptians, so are the Jordanians. They're in this fight with us. But we cannot win this war by killing them. We cannot kill our way out of this war. We need, in the longer term, medium and longer term, to go after the root causes that leads people to join these groups, whether it's lack of opportunity for jobs.
We're not going to be able to stop that in our lifetime or 50 lifetimes.
So essentially, the reason that ISIS is beheading people left, right, and center is because there are not enough job opportunities. This is the latest hogwash coming from the Obama administration. And in fairness, it's not just her saying it. Because John Kerry wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal. He writes this: we need to deploy a broader, far more creative arsenal, quote unquote. We need more than just military force, he writes. And what is it that they're talking about? They're talking about, quote unquote, transforming the environments that give birth to these movements. That's from John Kerry. We've got to transform the environments that give birth to these movements. And he also says that ISIS recruits among, quote, the disaffected and the disenfranchised. In other words, we have to make the Middle East prosperous. This is what they're basically saying. We have to make the Middle East prosperous, and then ISIS will stop. No. This has nothing to do with jobs. This has nothing to do with poverty. The root problem is an ideology that is an offshoot of the Islamic faith. And that ideology is mesmerizing to many. And in fact, on this very show, we had an expert on ISIS recruitment by the name of Ryan Mauro. And he explained that most of the people being recruited are from a wealthy class. In fact, Osama bin Laden himself was wealthy. There wasn't a job issue for him. This is an ideology based on an extremist perception of the Islamic faith and bent on destroying Western civilization, period. The root cause is the ideology, and the administration doesn't want to address it. That statement that Marie Harf made is so idiotic. It's like saying when you have a thief that invades your home, he wants to take from you. The root cause is he doesn't have a job. No, he's bent on doing evil. Evil exists. Evil has lots of justifications. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, need, want. Who cares? The point is, it's evil and it has to be stopped with force, period. And what's really twisted here is that George Bush had said, in the long run, folks, you want to prevent this? In the long run, this ideology is going to keep getting converts of various shapes and guises. In the long run, we've got to create democracy in the Middle East and give them an alternative. No, that wasn't good enough for Barack Obama and John Kerry. That was stupid. That was simplistic. That was unilateral. And yet, when they've kicked the legs out of the foreign policy of Bush, what do they come back to? Idiocy. Idiocy. And Marie Harf really deserves to be told, just shut up. And it's time for our mailbag. Please write to me at valuesthatneverdie@hotmail.com. Valuesthatneverdie@hotmail.com. Your letters are always welcome. Roxy from Andover, Massachusetts writes, Dr. Grace, the death of Kayla Mueller by ISIS is absolutely heartbreaking. Her selflessness and love of her family is inspiring. Indeed it is, and I think there will be books and movies written about this. Her legacy will live on. Dr. Grace, writes Harry from Brattleboro, Vermont. I'm outraged by the death of Kayla Mueller. How could President Obama sit on intelligence information for 6 weeks that could have saved her? Yes, and that is the question all of us keep asking. We played earlier in the show a clip by the American ambassador to Syria. They had information not just for weeks, but for years about what was happening in Syria. And the president just couldn't figure out what to do. And most of the times, he's such a nincompoop that he just can't decide what to do until events overtake him, leading to such tragedies as the death of Kayla Mueller. Bill from Juneau, Alaska writes, Scott Walker looks like the male version of Sarah Palin, unprepared and a bumbling fool. The GOP needs a better horse to win with. Well, I think that your statement is a little bit extreme. I wouldn't call him a bumbling fool. I do agree with you that he needs to do a lot more work in order to be ready. But unlike Sarah Palin, look, this is a guy that honors his word and completes his terms. One of the problems that Sarah Palin had is that she really cut her term short as governor. And that, too, was a huge strike against her. So it wasn't only that she was unprepared, is that she didn't even have enough executive experience. And I think Scott Walker has lots of experience. I hope that he can be ready for the national stage. Now, Lacey from Wake Forest, North Carolina. Dr. Grace, you're being too hard on Scott Walker. He epitomizes so many values that resonate with the American people, regardless of his level of education. Hey, I'm rooting for him, folks. I'm rooting for him. That's why I'm saying he's got to do better, because he's going to be ripped limb from limb if he doesn't. Kristen from Flint, Michigan. Dr. Grace, I also like Ted Cruz. Apart from being media savvy, what else can he do to win the hearts and minds of the American people in 2016? Well, I think he's doing a really good job of presenting himself as the only person out there that is really standing up to the Obama regime. And I think that the more he emphasizes what he's done to block the agenda, the more he really comes across as an alternative to this president. He's an alternative in ways that the Republican Party itself has really not been. He's almost been, even though he's just a senator, he's actually leading the Republican opposition to Barack Obama better than anybody out there. So I think the more we hear about that, the more we see him do that, it'll be to his credit. However, there's no getting around the fact that I think this time around, the American people are going to be looking for somebody with executive experience. Anastasia from Washington, D.C. Dr. Grace, how can the West put an end to the dictatorship and human rights abuses of Vladimir Putin? Well, the West right now is completely apathetic and pathetic in dealing with Vladimir Putin. They're going to do nothing to stop him. In fact, he's going to continue to gobble up more territory. He is, as one commentator said on this show, the only leader out there in the Western world, and he is just facing bureaucrats who basically bury their head in the sand, and they're not willing to confront him with military force. And that's the only thing that it's going to take to prevent Vladimir Putin from taking over more peoples. And finally, we have Robert from Lexington, Kentucky. Dr. Grace, President Obama is a buffoon who has mastered the art of mocking the office of the American presidency. 2016 can't come soon enough. And Robert, you're referencing the BuzzFeed video in which Obama took selfies of himself and made faces. Yes, an appalling moment, and all the more appalling since we now know that he did that shortly after the news, or on the same day that he got the news that Kayla Mueller was dead. What a contrast between him and her. This is Dr. Grace, upholding values that are never going to die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.